You know, in the history of music, there are legends, there are icons, and then there's Michael Jackson. A name so huge, a figure so globally known, that even just his silhouette is instantly recognizable. For years, he was the king of pop, an absolute force of nature who changed music, dance, and even the very idea of a music video. But his story is also one of the most complicated and controversial out there, a story of incredible highs and some really disturbing lows. So when a huge Hollywood biopic just called Michael was announced, everybody was asking the same thing. Which Michael Jackson story are they going to tell? Well, according to film critic Karsten Rehnquist, whose work we're diving into today, the answer is, well, it's complicated. We're going to break down his entire critique to figure out why this movie, for all its flash, feels like a sanitized story and, honestly, a huge missed opportunity.
Even before anyone saw a single second of this film, it was already walking on a knife's edge. This quote from Karsten Rehnquist, it says everything. This isn't just some movie release nervousness, it speaks to the insane amount of pressure around this film. Why? Because Michael Jackson's legacy isn't some settled history lesson. Oh no, it is an active, ongoing cultural battle. On one side, you've got millions of fans who see him as a pure genius, a humanitarian, a man who was hounded by the media. And on the other side, you have the incredibly serious and disturbing allegations that have followed his name for decades. Any movie about him has to pick a side, and no matter which side it picks, it's guaranteed to get intense backlash from the other. It's kind of a no-win situation. And that high-stakes, polarized world is the backdrop for this whole thing. We have to understand that before we even talk about the film itself.
So, to really dig into this, we've broken our analysis down into 5 key parts. First up, we're going to look at the heart of the movie, the main character. We'll explore why a film about one of the most electrifying performers ever made him feel surprisingly boring. Second, we're going to pull back the curtain and uncover a really fascinating piece of the puzzle. The story of the movie that almost was, complete with production nightmares and massive reshoots. Third, we'll talk about the acting, where you have these amazing performances trapped inside a pretty weak script. Fourth, we'll zoom out and look at the bigger picture and see how Michael fits into the tired old formula of the modern musical biopic. And finally, we'll try to answer the biggest question of all. Who is this movie actually for?
All right, let's jump right into the single biggest issue, the one that everything else really revolves around, the protagonist himself. We're talking about Michael Jackson. I mean, this was a man who was a walking, talking bundle of fascinating contradictions. He was painfully shy in interviews, but on stage, an absolute force of nature. He was one of the most famous people on the entire planet, yet he built a private fantasy land just to escape it all. His life was just a whirlwind of genius, controversy, and just profound strangeness. So the big question the critic asks is this: how on earth do you take that person, that once-in-a-lifetime figure, and make him seem flat, one-dimensional, and frankly, kinda uninteresting on screen? Let's unpack how they managed to do it.
This quote really just hits the nail on the head. It gets to the very core of the disappointment. Just think about all the amazing stories you could tell from his life. You could make a whole movie just about his artistic journey. You know, from being this little kid prodigy in the Jackson 5 to the solo artist who smashed racial barriers on MTV and completely rewrote the rules of pop music. You could make a film about his incredibly complex and often painful family life. You could make a movie just about the crushing pressure of being that famous. The point is, his life wasn't simple. It was messy, it was brilliant, and it was deeply human. But according to this critique, the film just decides to ignore almost all of that and instead gives us this super simplified version of the man that loses all the complexity that made him so fascinating in the first place.
So, if we don't get a complex character, what do we get instead? Well, we get a picture of perfection. The movie shows Michael not just as a gifted artist, but as an almost flawless person who's always right, who's always misunderstood, and who always wins. Now, from a storytelling 101 perspective, that is a huge problem. I mean, any good story, doesn't matter if it's a superhero flick or a historical drama, it needs conflict, it needs stakes. The hero has to face real challenges, they need to have real flaws they have to work through. Without that struggle, there's just no drama. The film basically creates a character who just glides through life. And while that might be kind of nice to watch for a minute, it's not very compelling in the long run.
Let's look at 2 specific examples of how the movie just erases any real conflict. First, the MTV scene. In real life, getting Billie Jean on MTV was a massive fight. The network had this notorious, unspoken rule against playing videos by black artists. It took Michael's record label president threatening to pull all of their other artists off the channel to finally break that barrier. It was a huge moment in music history. The movie? It boils this whole struggle down to one tiny scene where an executive says no, Michael just tells him to try harder, and the guy immediately makes one phone call and poof, problem solved. All that historical weight? Gone. And it's the same with his dad, Joe Jackson, a source of documented abuse and lifelong trauma. That relationship is softened into just a standard story of a tough manager. You get no sense of the deep-seated fear and pain that really shaped Michael's entire life.
Now, the film does try to give its main character a motivation. We hear it over and over again from Michael in the movie. His main goal is to be free. Free from his dad, free from his record label, free from the pressures of fame. And look, on the surface, that's a powerful and relatable idea. That desire for freedom, both personal and artistic, can be the engine for a really great story. It gives our hero a clear goal.
And this is where the movie's entire story just falls apart. Look, in any story, if a character wants to be free, you have to show the audience the cage they're trapped in, right? What is the actual tangible thing stopping them from being free? The movie never really establishes one. Joe Jackson is shown as this greedy manager, but Michael seems to defy him pretty easily. The music industry has doubts, but they basically fold the second he pushes back. He gets unbelievable wealth and total creative control. So if he's already free to do whatever he wants, what exactly is he fighting against? Without a real threat, that goal of being free just feels empty. It has no dramatic punch.
So you're probably sitting there wondering, how could a movie about such a dramatic life end up with so little drama? Well, to figure that out, we have to look behind the camera. It turns out, the version of Michael we're seeing in theaters, it's not the movie they originally planned to make, not even close. The story of its production is a drama all on its own, one filled with legal bombshells, a totally different first script, and huge, last-minute reshoots that completely changed the DNA of the film.
This timeline right here is the key to everything. According to the reports that the critic cites, the original script for Michael was way darker. It supposedly opened with the news of the sexual abuse allegations breaking in the 90s, and the whole third act was going to be about the trial. It was a film designed to tackle the most controversial part of his story head-on. But then, they hit a massive legal wall. An attorney for the Jackson estate apparently found a clause in a legal settlement with one of the accusers that said that person could never ever be depicted in a film. This discovery, as you can imagine, threw the whole production into total chaos and forced them to do a radical rewrite and 22 days of super expensive reshoots just last summer to basically rip that entire storyline out of the movie.
And this chart really just lays out the results of that massive pivot perfectly. On the left, you have the original plan, a movie that was going to dive into scandal, complexity, and flaws. On the right, you have the movie we actually got, a safe, sanitized, celebratory story that's all about a flawless hero. It is a complete 180. Instead of a challenging film that would make audiences grapple with uncomfortable questions, they went for the safe option that gives fans exactly what they want to see. You can almost feel the ghost of that first movie haunting the edges of the one we have now. And this is where things get really awkward. Because they reshot and re-edited the whole movie. But some pieces from that darker original script are clearly still in there. For example, the film still has these scenes showing Michael's deep fascination with childhood, his connection to kids, and his desire to build a place like Neverland Ranch. Now, think about that. In the original script, a movie that was going to deal with the allegations, those scenes would have had this heavy, complicated, and deeply unsettling feeling to them. They would have been a crucial part of the psychological puzzle. But in the final, sanitized film, where all of that context has been surgically removed, these scenes just feel weird. They're played as if they're sweet and innocent, but without the story they were built for, they can come across as tonally jarring and honestly, even a little creepy.
Okay, so we've got a movie with a flattened out main character and a story that was basically Frankenstein together at the last minute. But what about the actors? This brings us to what the critic says is one of the most frustrating parts of the movie. Watching these incredibly talented actors give it their all with material that just doesn't give them anything to work with. It's a classic case of a great cast being totally let down by a weak script.
Let's start with the man himself. Casting Michael Jackson's actual nephew, Jafar Jackson, in the lead role was a big gamble, but according to the critique, it was an act of pure genius. He's apparently outstanding in the film. This isn't just some copycat impression. He doesn't just nail the moves in the voice. He somehow captures and channels the energy of his uncle in a way that feels incredibly real and authentic. Apparently, for people watching the film, the moment you see him perform is just genuinely captivating. He really embodies the spirit of Michael on stage.
And that's what makes the movie's flaws so much more tragic. You have this lightning in a bottle performance right at the center of your film, an actor who's giving 1,000% and totally succeeding, and you hand him a script with no conflict, no complexity, and no real emotional journey to play. It's like having a world-class race car driver and only letting them drive in a school zone. It's such a waste of amazing talent. The performance is there, but the story never gives it the challenges it needs to become truly great. It's a shadow of what it could have been.
Now let's talk about the film's main villain, Joe Jackson. The real Joe Jackson was a deeply complicated person, an abusive father who was also the driving force behind his children's success. There is a rich, dramatic story to be told there, but instead the film just simplifies him into this one-dimensional cartoon villain. He's just the stereotypical greedy family manager. He wants money, he's tough on the kids, and that's pretty much it. And by making your villains so simple, you automatically make your hero's journey simpler too. Michael doesn't have to overcome some complex psychological demon, he just has to outsmart a greedy caricature.
Of course, who did they cast in this role? Colman Domingo, who is without a doubt one of the best actors working today. And because he's such a master of his craft, he does manage to find these little moments of depth and nuance that aren't even on the page. He brings some kind of shape to this thinly written character. But even for an actor as incredible as he is, there's only so much you can do. The source notes that this is probably one of Domingo's weaker performances lately, not because he's bad, but because the script itself just trapped him in a box. It's just more proof that even the greatest actor in the world can't save a role that's fundamentally underwritten.
So this brings us to a much bigger conversation, because Michael doesn't exist in a bubble. It's part of the musical biopic genre, which, let's be honest, has gotten famous in the last few years for being incredibly predictable. At their worst, these movies can feel like a greatest hits album of an artist's life, like a visual Wikipedia article that just checks off all the famous moments without ever digging into the actual person behind them. And the critique argues that Michael falls into a very similar trap. Let's compare a few recent biopics just to see the different ways you can go. The Robbie Williams movie Better Man is described as bold and wild. It totally leans into the absurdity and excess of his life. At one point, it literally turns him into a CGI monkey. It takes big, creative risks. The new Bob Dylan film, A Complete Unknown, reportedly does the exact opposite, deliberately keeping the audience at a distance to preserve that mysterious, unknowable vibe Dylan has. Michael, on the other hand, chooses the safest road possible. It tells the story in a perfectly straight line. There are no bumps, no challenging choices. Its main goal seems to be to make the audience happy at every single turn, and to never, ever make them feel uncomfortable or force them to think too hard. So, if the story's weak and the characters are flat, how does the movie still work for so many people? The answer is really simple. It coasts. It coasts on the undeniable, world-changing power of Michael Jackson's music. The filmmakers know that just hearing Thriller or Man in the Mirror on a massive IMAX sound system is an amazing, almost euphoric experience, and the movie leans on that. Hard. It uses the power of the music to generate all the emotion that the script itself fails to create. But here's the thing, enjoying a concert isn't the same as enjoying a movie. The film is basically using his musical genius as a crutch to prop up its weak storytelling.
This all leads us to our final and maybe most important question. If this film is a sanitized, drama-free story that wastes a talented cast on a weak script, then who is this movie for? And for that audience, does it work? The answer, it seems, really depends on what you think a biopic is supposed to do. The critic makes a really important point. At his screening, when the credits started to roll, the audience burst into applause. For that group of people, most likely his die-hard fans, the movie gave them exactly what they came for. They didn't show up to see a complex look at a troubled man. They came to be thrilled, to celebrate, to see the king of pop in all his glory on the big screen. They wanted an empowering, exciting 2-hour trip down memory lane. For them, a movie that ignores all the darkness and only focuses on the light isn't a flaw. It's the entire point. And for that audience, this film is a home run. But then, there's the other side of the coin, the perspective that the critic has. For viewers who are interested in Michael Jackson as a complicated, flawed human being, this purely celebratory approach just feels like a massive missed opportunity. It's safe, it's easy, and you know what? It's boring. To take one of the most complex figures of our time and strip away all of his complications is to ignore the very thing that makes him worth making a movie about. It chooses to polish the icon instead of investigating the man. And that leaves us with this final, big question that goes way beyond just this one movie. What is the real purpose of a biopic about a beloved but controversial person? Is its job to be a tribute, a cinematic monument that gives the fans an uplifting experience and protects a legacy? Or does it have a different job? To be a piece of investigative art, something that digs into the messy, uncomfortable, and complicated truths of the human being behind the legend? With Michael, the filmmakers and the Jackson estate made their choice very, very clear. And now it's up to every single person who watches it to decide if they made the right one.